Red Gaming, I'm the Archmaster. Today we're going over our game system, the one that hopefully replaces D&D 5e at your table, and, eventually, because it's not done yet. And we're going over the classes. We are on to the third archetype of classes. This is the King archetype, right? So, this corresponds to the pillar of status, right? So, the whole game is made up of three pillars: freedom, power, status, four pillars: freedom, power, status, and mystery, right? The King archetype belongs to status, right? This is also, you may have heard of the pillars of adventure, exploration, combat, and social interaction. Social interaction leads to status, and the King archetype is kind of the herald of that thing. So it's all the same. Social interaction, status, King archetype. What it's really about is relationships with people, right? So you play the King archetype. You play a class in the King archetype. You are playing a class who gets their power from some kind of relationship, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be with people. It can be with, plants, animals, etc. I'll get to it, but that's what the King archetype is about, right? Your explorer archetype, your skulk, your skirmisher, your wayfinder. It's all about your movement and your exploration in the world. The warrior archetype, you have your armiger, your medium armor fighter, your brute, your zero armor fighter, the rager guy, and then your bulwark, the heavy armor fighter, right? They're all about fighting, right? They're warriors, right? Your King archetype, it's all about relationship. It's not about your exploration or your weapons and armor. It's about you having a relationship with something, and that gives you your power, right? So, now we're getting into some of my favorite stuff. It's the magic, okay? In my system, I actually, not just my system, my whole world, I totally made my own magic, right? And I'm not saying it's original by any means, but it's totally different from 5e. It's totally different from Forgotten Realms, Elder Scrolls, etc., right? It's its own thing. It has its own 6 different distinct types of magic, right? And yes, one giant thing I have against 5e is that all of the magic that's supposed to be different kinds of magic are actually the exact same type of magic, okay? Like, oh boy. You get to you get to your wizard, right? And he's like, I studied my books. I studied my books, and I know magic because I learned it. It's all up here in my head. I memorize spells, and I have these very specific spell slots where this spell goes into that slot, this spell goes into that slot. It's very mathematical and calculated because I'm a wizard. All right, that's great. Wizard, wonderful. I like your spell slots. I like your idea. Cool. Then we get to the cleric. The cleric is like, oh yes, I pray to my God, and I, study the scriptures, and I'm pure of heart, and I call on my God to smite the evil and cast spells. And I have everything very mathematically calculated. We have individual spell slots, and I memorize them, and it's all intellectual, just like a wizard. You're like, that's a little weird. Okay, next. I'm a bard. I'm all about the emotions. I'm all about the story and the song and how I weave the emotions and the stories of people to have these complex narratives that come true in real life. I pluck at the music of creation. Actually, no, I just memorize spells. I study it very studiously, and I have all these very specific spells, and they go into the exact specific spell slots, and once I fire it, I'm done. But your mechanics don't match your flavor, buddy. It's like, look, it gets worse. Let's go. I'm a druid. I just have this connection with nature. I just feel things. Look at me, I'm like, ooh, nature, all the plants and the animals. I can make a plant grow around my fingers. It's all about this wonderful relationship. It's not about rules, baby. It's not about the stuff you gotta do. It's about the relationship with your fellow plants and animals. Oh yeah. Me, I study spells. I memorize spells. Like abracadabra, alakazam, I have to have this exact material component, and I have spell slots. This specific spell goes in this specific spell slot. Give me a break. These are completely different types of magic. Their mechanics should be completely different. I should feel different playing a druid than playing a wizard, than playing a bard, a paladin, a sorcerer, whatever. Lastly, sorcerer, okay? You have your innate caster, dude, I have all this innate magic in me. I'm just busting with it. I'm overflowing with magic, baby. I mean, come on. I can just cast spells forever, right? This is super cool. No, actually, I have very specific spells that I have memorized because somehow having the magic in me isn't enough. I need to study spells and memorize them in my head. You have to memorize spells? Give me a break. You're a sorcerer. What? You don't know spells. You have them in you. It's supposed to be overflowing. Come out. Read the flavor description. It's supposed to be coming out of you uncontrollably. Give me a break. You have to memorize it. And once you memorize your spells, you can't cast anymore? Did your sorcerer's blood run out? What the heck? It makes 0 sense, right? The 5e mechanics they should have actually corresponded to your class. Guess what? In my game system, they do. Okay, I feel strongly about tabletop fantasy games and whatnot, apparently. So anyway, in my system, sorcerers, the ones that have the magic in them, they're the only ones who have... It went from a volcano to a slow waterfall trickle. Anyway, in my system, your innate casters that are overflowing with magic, they are the only ones with cantrips. They can cast spells unlimited all they want, right? And they can overpower them into big bursts and whatnot, and there's risk and blah, blah, blah. But they have unlimited magic in them, right? The other classes don't. They get their magic from somewhere, so they don't have cantrips. They don't just have unlimited spells, right? It's one way where I'm hey, you want to feel like you're, a sorcerer, you have this innate power in you and it doesn't run out? Play this class, it's the only one with cantrips. That actually makes sense. It's cool, it feels better. They're the blaster caster, etc., right? We're just going on completely, we're not even talking about the classes anymore. We're just talking about everything else. I guess we're going to talk about the classes. Well, I'll talk about all the different types of casters and stuff later. For now, I have to just stick with the title of the video. Anyway, the King Archetype classes. You have 3 classes. The Chanter, the Conduit, and the Devout, right? So, the Chanter is the one that uses narrative magic. I like the idea. Okay, so there are 6 types of magic. This is the first one I'm telling you about, right? So, narrative magic. In my world, I have narrative magic, right? It's the words of people. This is not a new idea. It's not my idea. I've taken it from countless other places that use narrative magic, right? That's kind of like the old school version of what a spell is. The word spell is just the German word for speech, for word. It's spell. It's the reason why we have spelling. And the word spell just means a word, right? So it's the very oldest idea that spells are just spoken words, and you say something that should happen and then it does, right? So I actually take that and say, here's Chanter magic. What you say happens, right? But there are different flavors of that. There are different types of Chanter magic, right? So you have your Chanter class. Your 2 paths that each have their own subclasses. Your 2 paths of the Chanter are the Bard, where you're using narrative, but you're fueling that narrative with emotion, the emotions of people around you. That's why you play your music and you sing, stories and songs and whatnot, and you build up that emotion in people. And it can even be their own impressions of the story, right? It can even be details of the story itself. If you're talking about history and whatnot, and you bring up that historical event and you bring it in the room and people put their emotion toward it, and then you take it in, you take it back into yourself and you make a spell out of it, right? It's very specific. It's not just oh, you pluck at the weave. It's all magic shouldn't just be the weave. That's one magic. That's one class. If all magic just uses the weave, you just have one class, buddy. You have 6 different subclasses. I would say the wizard and the druid and the bard and the sorcerer, every single class in 5e are really just subclasses of the same class. The weaver. The mage weaver. That's all they do. They're all mage weaver. They all just use the weave and pluck at the weave. It's the same. It's just one class. You just use the weave, right? So anyway, in this you actually take the emotions and a bit of narrative and whatnot of the actual events of history. If you're a history bard, if that's your lore bard or something, yeah. Then you take that and you use it and you cast your spells with it, right? And so you don't have spell slots. You have individual stories, individual spells. This is the one class that can actually use the word spell, and it makes sense, right? You take those individual spells and stories and effects and whatnot that you have molded through your power of being a bard and your music and all that, your study and whatnot, and you have all of those and they can be written on sheets of paper or bound to objects and whatnot, like a flute or whatnot that's a temporary enchanted item where you play your flute and you cast a spell from it. So yeah, you can either reenact those events from history where it's I'm telling the story of the great battle that the great king won, and so you imbue your allies and you're we are the soldiers of the king and we shall win this day, and then they all get a bonus to their attack and stuff. It's spells and stuff, but it actually makes sense, and you don't have these spell slots that you just get back when you rest. Oh, I'm feeling another rant coming on. You should not get your spell slots back when you rest. First of all, it's terrible balance game-wise because you're not having 8 combat encounters a day, and yes, it's supposed to be 8 combat encounters, not just 8 encounters of any kind, because it's in the combat section of the book. So don't tell me it's supposed to be 8 encounters of any kind. It's absolutely not supposed to be 8 encounters of any kind. It's supposed to be 8 combat encounters. Fight me. Anyway, other encounters don't take up any resources. Why would they talk about other encounters being calculated in how many CRs they can take in a day, how many CR of monsters they can take in a day? If it was other types of encounters, exploration and social interaction, they don't take up resources. Oh, it's obviously combat encounters that they're talking about. Anyway, so you shouldn't get your spells back when you rest, unless you're a sorcerer, a vessel, an innate caster. If you have magic welling up inside of you, and you cast spells and you're physically tired because you're physically using the magic in your blood, it makes sense you kind of slow down, right? At the start of the day, you could cast 5th level spells, and as you go on, the more spells you can cast, the level of spell you can cast goes down until you're just down to, 0 level spells, cantrips. You can cast limited cantrips, like, dude, I'm tired, right? You need to sleep. Well, that makes sense. You sleep, your energy, you eat some food and drink some wine or whatnot, and then your energy wells up and you wake up and now you can cast more spells. The innate caster, what 5e calls the sorcerer, is the only class that should get their spells back when they sleep, because resting actually makes sense, right? Not every class. It makes no sense. And it's just bad balance. Anyway, when you're a bard, the way you get your spells back is you go to a tavern or anywhere there's a crowd and you play your music. You make a performance check, essentially. And you play your music, and you roll your die and add your charisma and proficiency and whatnot, and then the number you roll, that determines how many spell points, you could call them. That's how much magic you have to cast your spells with. So if you don't have any crowds, if you don't have any people around, you can't regain your spells. So guess what? Guess what that does? That encourages actual role playing. Now the player who plays a bard is like, hey guys, where's the nearest town? Where's the nearest tavern? We gotta do a detour, guys. We can't just be going in the wilderness. I need a tavern. I need a town. I gotta play music, right? It makes you actually do what your character would do and role play being a bard and going out and doing what a bard would do, right? The same thing with something like, well, actually, I'll get to that in a minute. I think these videos are just gonna be long and there's not much I can do about it. Because I'm so excited about these classes. They're so much fun to play. I can just think about them and be like, this would be so fun to play. The characters are actually going to roleplay what the character would do because their power relies on it. How do you get a player to actually roleplay, to do what their character would do? Well, what do players like most? Power. They like cool stuff, right? We'll just say, hey, you only get cool stuff when you do what your character would do. Boom! You've just birthed a role player. He's doing it accidentally. He's not a hardcore role player, but he's gonna role play. He's gonna do what his character would do, even if involuntarily, because you tied it to his power through game design, right? That's what I'm doing. It's so exciting to play my game with my players because my players actually do what their character would do and actually act like a bard or a wizard or a druid. I'll get to it in a second, right? Okay, so you have the chanter class, right? One path is the bard. You have your lore bard subclass and your valor bard subclass. You have all your subclasses, right? The other path of chanter is the skald. This one is more about the authority itself, like narrative, right? So with your skald path, right? Here's one of my favorite examples, right? Authority, right? You speak your narrative not powered by people's emotions, but powered by the authority of your narrative, right? Well, how do you get authority? In my world, say a king has authority. There are lots of people and entities and all sorts of things that have authority, but let's just say king, right? You have a king who has authority, right? If you want to, cast the command spell, right, and say halt, right? What authority do you have to halt that person, right? Well, you know about the story of old King Harold that died 200 years ago, and he was a great king, right? So you can say, by the authority of King Harold, halt, right? And you use your magic, and that's a first level spell. Sure, you can just invoke his name, right? His name, you conjure up the authority of the king through his name. You have invoked his name, and therefore invoked his authority, and it works, right? But that's not going to work for like a super high level being or telling an army to halt or like suggestion spell. You need something more than just a name. So this is where symbolic magic comes in. If you'll notice, a symbol is really just a narrative, right? If I wear a crown on my head, it's a narrative that says I am king, right? That's kind of what symbols and items are. It's speaking, it's language, right? It's just another form of language. It's a narrative. So if you want to be more powerful or get a bonus to your roll to cast or your spell slots or something, right? You can, find like a wooden crown or make like a little like crown of twigs and put it on your head and pick up a stick and be like, this is my scepter, and be like, all right, by authority of King Harold, halt, with your scepter and your crown. And that makes it more powerful because you're speaking more of a narrative. Other things besides your words are contributing to your narrative. Your wand, your scepter is contributing to your narrative. Your crown is saying, hey, he's a king, and it's contributing to your narrative. Of course, that only gets you up to like second level spells. If you want, real spells, then you have to get something like, an actual king's crown. Or if you actually go out dungeon delving and find King Harold's crown and scepter, and you literally wear King Harold's crown and wield his scepter and say, by authority of King Harold, halt, you get max level spells, right? So, like the actual narrative and the symbology of the world, that actually contributes to your spells. And yeah, this isn't super simple. This isn't 5e where you just sit down and you play and you're, oh, well, I'm rolling dice, casting spells, that was fun, I'll see you next time. The way I made magic, the way I made casters in my world, it's for more hardcore players. And don't be scared off by the word hardcore. Most of you are probably hardcore, right? What I would define as hardcore. It just means that you're not like super casual. As long as you're older than 14, you have the capacity to be hardcore. It's one thing if you just want to hang out with your friends. Well, then yeah, don't play a caster. It's a little complicated. But play something else, right? But if you actually enjoy the game, if you actually enjoy role-playing, RPing, if you like the world, if you like magic, if you like combat, if you're any sort of normal, average player that actually enjoys the game, then you'll be totally fine with this. Anyway, I think it's actually better than 5e, because it's one thing to just have everything be, simple and plain, and that's a use, that is a benefit. It has definitely benefited 5e, but I noticed so many extra products that people are making make the game a little more complex. Like I want a little more meat, I want a little more something, right? So that's what this is. This is kind of between 5e and Pathfinder. It's if you've ever heard of Level Up Advanced 5e, it might be something like that. I haven't played it myself yet, but it's a little more like 5e, but just a little more advanced, right? Just leveled up. What is breaking in the other room? Anyway, so yeah. Using authority magic, symbolic magic, narrative and stuff, that's your chanter, right? You have your bard and your skald, and those are the two paths, right? Next we get to the conduit. The conduit uses a connection with the forces of nature to invoke their aid and bring wrath to enemies. So the conduit is the nature one, right? You have your two paths of conduit, your druid and your shaman. The druid connects to the actual physical substance of nature, the plants, the animals, the seasons, the ground, the earth, the trees, the mountains, etc. The physical is mostly plants and animals, but there are subclasses for everything, right? So they actually connect to the real nature, right? The shaman connects to the spirits of nature, spirits of the dead, the spirits of plants and animals and trees, etc. Right? They're both very similar because like historically, a druid was just a shaman, right? So it's more two halves of the same coin. You are the same class. You're the conduit. You are the conduit between nature and the real world, right? That's why you're called the conduit. But are you a conduit between the physical part of the natural world or the spiritual part of the natural world, right? So one thing with druid, because druid is the path I've fleshed out more, is that you don't have spells or spell slots. Okay, the druid is perhaps the most advanced magic class in my system because you don't have any specific spells. You just describe to the GM what you want. You say, hey GM, there's a tree here. I want tree bark. I touch the tree and I want, bark skin, right? I want +3 to my AC. It's like, cool, roll your cast. Like I rolled it, you roll charisma for druids actually, because it's about a relationship with nature, with anything, right? All of the king archetype classes use charisma because it's about your relationship with something, right? So you roll like, hey, tree, please give me your bark. And like, boom, you have bark skin. And you roll your die and you have thresholds and whatnot, but how long the spell lasts is determined by your die roll. It's not if it goes off, it's how long it lasts, right? Because it's kind of guaranteed that, well, you're a druid and you touch the bark and you get the bark skin. Like, why would I say, no, it didn't work? It's like, did I stop being a druid for 5 seconds? Like, what happened, right? So, like, you get it. It's just, how long does that last? How long does your bark skin last, right? Same thing with polymorphing stuff. I take polymorphing, instead of saying, like, oh, it's a whole body polymorph, you're a frog or not, right? I say, no. The druid's whole thing, like, the thing that sets them apart from any other class is their wild shape, is their polymorphing. It's wild shape, okay? I took wild shape and ran with that. I said, okay, let's make everything wild shape. Instead of casting the jump spell on yourself, right? Ooh, I can jump 3 times as high. No, you wild shaped your legs into big frog legs, and now you can jump, right? I have partial wild shapes. If you want, an extra, melee damage, wild shape your arms into tiger claws or crab claws or something. Instead of boring shillelagh, where I just grab a stick and now it's magical and it hits harder and there's no reason why. I have to make things visual. I make them immersive. I say, here's why it works, right? You get crab claws, lion claws, etc., right? If you want to, fly, well, then you give yourself bird wings or butterfly wings or something, right? Like you polymorph different parts of your body, and the more of your body that you wild shape, those are higher level spells. I don't call them leveled spells. It's arm, hand, it's like hand, arm, half your body, and then like full body or something like that. And then compound is like if you're actually enlarging your own size. If you want your whole body to change into something bigger than you are, right? So it's tiers of spell, but it's like, how hard is this for the druid to do, right? So yeah, you can switch your eyes to cat eyes and have dark vision, right? Like instead of I cast the dark vision spell, abracadabra, boom, I have dark vision for exactly 60 seconds while I'm concentrating. That's such a rote, wizardly, arcane, intellectual way of doing it. It's like, no, I actually got cat eyes because I polymorph, right? Like I wild shape. I think druids would be so much cooler if you just describe, like, hey GM, I want spider legs. It's like, great, roll, all right, you have spider legs for 1 minute, and then like, boom, But here's the limitation on that. You have a lot of freedom because you can polymorph into anything. The limitation is you have to actually be touching the thing that you want to polymorph into. So if you want to have bark skin and wild shape all your skin into tree bark, you have to actually touch a tree. You can't just be walking around in the middle of a desert and be like, bark skin. It's like, no. You have to actually be in contact with nature. Same thing, if you want those frog legs to jump really high, you have to have a frog with you. And if you want to jump high with a rabbit, you have to have a rabbit with you. If you want to fly like a butterfly, you have to have a butterfly with you. If you want tiger claws, you have to have a tiger with you. Guess what this means in gameplay? It means the player who plays a druid, conduit druid, they actually want to keep nature around them. They say, I have like 10 animals that are following me everywhere, right? And, they always have to speak with animals constantly because that shouldn't be a spell. You're a druid. Of course you can speak with animals. That's your whole shtick. Constant speak with animals on with druids because that just makes sense. So anyway, you always have your speak with animals. You can tame and calm animals all the time. Not everyone will decide to follow you. That might be a charisma roll or something. That's like preparing your spells in the morning. It's like you go to the tiger and say, hey, will you follow me? So you have to there are only certain types of spells you can prepare. It's essentially a one-to-one transfer, but it just makes sense for a druid, right? So you're walking everywhere and you have these animals with you, right? And so you're like, oh, I need tiger claws. Hey, tiger, boom. You touch the tiger, you wild shape from the tiger, you take his claws, and it doesn't necessarily take away his claws, but you take the concept and the magic of his claws, and then you wild shape into it. With some creatures, they actually disappear and morph into your body, right? So if you wanted to become a tiger completely and wild shape into it, you touch the tiger and his body would morph with yours and you would wild shape into a tiger. And then when you're done, you split back out, right? That's a connection with nature. That's like, hey, I want to be in you. I want to be with you. Like we're one, right? It makes so much sense. It's so cool. I think that's so much more interesting, right? And so guess what this does? Roleplay again, baby. It makes the player who's playing a druid actually want to roleplay being a druid. It's like, hey, I want to go find a forest. I have to go out and commune with nature. Meaning, I want to go out and look for animals because I need more animals for more spells and whatnot. It makes them actually want. And if the GM's like, oh yeah, there are these poachers and loggers and they're chopping down forests and whatnot. The player who's playing a druid is like, wait a minute, that's affecting my spells. No, stop them, right? It makes the player actually do what a druid would do. It makes them actually play what a druid would do. It's so cool. It encourages roleplay. It demands roleplay because your power is tied to your ability to actually play play a druid and do what they're doing, right? And of course, you may be thinking, okay, that's impractical. If I want to turn into an elephant, I have to carry an elephant around with me. It's like, no, here's the thing. As long as you have the thing with you, the living thing, living plant or animal, then you can wild shape into as many times as you want, right? But you can take a piece of that animal and you can wild shape into it once, and the piece is consumed. It morphs into you and whatnot, and then you morph back out, and the piece is gone. Okay? So, if you want to polymorph into, a tiger, and it's not practical to carry a tiger, like, hey tiger, can I have a tooth? Can I have a piece of fur? Can I have a claw? Something, right? Or like an alligator, hey, can I have a scale? Can I have one of your broken teeth? Etc., right? And you carry that with you, and you can use it once, right? So those are your prepared spells. So it's balanced, it's cool. Most players playing a druid will only take smaller animals with them that they can keep in their clothes, like rabbits and turtles, things that can follow them around and won't cause a problem. But it also makes players not like being in cities if they're a druid, because they're like, there are no plants around here, there are no animals around here. I can't rest and regain my spells, right? I can't actually regain any stuff because there are animals here. I don't like cities. And then the player playing a druid starts complaining about cities and there's not enough nature, exactly the way a druid would do, right? It's so cool. I actually, when you're playing a magic class, a mage in any of my games, you actually feel like a mage because the mechanics support it. You can wild shape and all these things in limited times because you have a connection and a relationship with nature. Of course you can, right? And then, if you're not in nature, you don't get it. Oh, it makes sense. It's so cool. It's really good. And yeah, that means it's not just anyone can play any race in any class in any setting that the GM makes and it'll all work. No, it won't. You have to actually think about it. If you're playing Curse of Strahd and you're in Barovia and there are no forests nearby or everything's all dead and shadowy, or you go into the Shadowfell, you can't replenish any of your stuff. There are no real living creatures there, only shadow creatures, right? If you're in, the Ravenloft, which is like a part of the Shadowfell or something, it's like, sorry, you can't replenish anything here. Druids are like, I don't want to go to Ravenloft. Exactly. It makes you actually feel like a druid. Anyway, man, I spent a long time just on the one conduit class with druid. But anyway, that's just an example of how my system actually, it makes it feel real. Instead of just saying like, oh, you're a druid, here's art. Everything else in the game, like all the mechanics, totally contradict the idea that you're a druid. But it's written on the top of your sheet that you are. It's like, no. All the mechanics, all the art, all the word, everything supports the idea that you're a druid or a bard or whatnot. It all supports it. It makes it real. It makes it immersive. My game is designed to be the most immersive game you've ever played, where it's like, I actually feel like a bloody druid. Like, seriously. And then I want you to play my game and then go to something like 5e, be like, why do we all have the same caster mechanics? Why don't I feel like a druid anymore? Like, I want to spoil you in my system, where you go to anything else and you're like, there's no substance. Where is it? It's not real anymore, right? Anyway, lastly, for the king archetype, so your chanter is about, your relationships with people. If you're a bard, you have your music and whatnot, or your relationships with like history and historical figures. And like I'm going to, like put on the crown of King Harold and like use his authority. It's about relationships, and your spells are all with people, right? You're not going to cast Fireball if you're a chanter or a bard, right? You're going to cast Charm and read thoughts and command and stuff. You're going to cast stuff that has to do with people. I take all of the spells of all of the classes and I heavily restrict them and say, if you're a druid, you're not going to be casting Fireball, you're not going to be casting Fly, you're going to be wild shaping and commanding animals and plants. Like, hey animal, go out and attack him. Hey plant, like stick your branches down and attack the enemy, or like build a wall or something, right? Like, spike growth and whatnot. You'll be commanding plants and animals, and you'll be wild shaping into plants and animals, but you will not be casting spells. Like, most of the spells on the 5e spell list are not druid spells. I get rid of them. Even if in 5e it's the druid spell list, I get rid of them. You're just going to cast druid spells and feel like a druid. Guess what, marshals? This is how we fix the martial caster divide. You take away the insane versatility that casters have, where they can do anything, and there's like a 90% overlap between all the spells of all the classes. They can all do everything. Take it away. You say, the druid is the only one who can wild shape and polymorph. Like, no one else has polymorph except the druid. The druid can be like, I'm gonna turn you into a frog, right? Because that's polymorph, that's wild shape, it's something the druid has, okay? The bard can't do that. Tell me how emotion magic and narrative turns someone into a land whale, an orca or something. It makes zero sense. Doesn't make sense, so it's not in my system. My system is 5e if it made sense, right? I keep classes and subclasses and your 6 attributes. I keep so much stuff. It's still the bones of 5e, but it just makes sense. Anyway, right, so your chanter is about your relationships with people and history and all that stuff. The conduit is about your relationship with nature in its various forms, and the devout. This one replaces the cleric. So far, I just have one path for the cleric because one path for the devout, the path being the cleric, because I'm still working on it, workshopping. I'm not exactly sure what the other path is going to be. Is it like cleric and Templar, or like Crusader? Like, I'm trying to actually figure out how it works, right? But anyway, for now, we just have the cleric. So in my system, I don't have gods. I have various entities and stuff. Like in Elder Scrolls, you have the Daedric princes and whatnot. I have various entities and princes and all sorts of things all over the place, right? But just no gods. There's no one being or several beings that created the world or created the races or anything like that. So where does the devout get their power? Well, from their actions, right? In my system, when you actually, this is kind of like narrative magic, right? There's a reason why the devout and the chanter are under the same king archetype, because the whole king archetype is about relationships and narrative, kind of broadly, right? So the devout class is about, your actions are essentially it's like a vending machine, right? I'm gonna start over. As a devout, you take certain actions. Say you are good, right? We'll use the D&D alignment system, even though I don't use it. We'll say, law, good, chaos, etc. We'll take good and say if you are a good person, you do good actions. Of course, there's a list in the book of good actions. Feeding the poor, etc. Right? Rescuing your allies, saving them, healing, etc. You take good actions, and then the world says, oh look, this person is a good person. They are coloring their soul the color of good, which in my system is it's gold, right? So their soul is becoming a golden soul. They are doing good things, like by walking this road, the road of goodness. They're actually becoming good. They're taking it into themselves, right? And so it's kind of like an attunement, where you attune your soul to a certain concept with your actions. You take actions that align with that concept, the concept of good, and you have attuned your body and soul and everything to goodness. Therefore, you get the powers of goodness. In my system, good governs, healing, restoration, anti-possession, etc. Right? So if you are a good person, you're a conduit of good, and you're like, I do good things, you get good spells. In my system, they're miracles, right? And no, they aren't all called spells. Like one person, like a druid, druid has their channels because they're a conduit. They channel things. A devout has miracles. A chanter is the only one that actually has something like spells. Anyway, that was a tangent. Your devout, they do good things and they get healing miracles and whatnot because that's something that belongs to good. A good person, the idea of the idea of like being good to people, like the actual definition of goodness is like a benevolent, generous type of thing. That's kind of like what good is, right? And don't think like morally good, like the right thing to do. More like goodness itself, right? Like good versus evil, like in the Bible when it says evil befell the person, they're talking about bad things befell the person, right? So anyway, so yeah, you walk the path of good, you do good with your actions, and then you get good miracles, and you can help people, and etc. Right? So when you do more good things, you regain your spells, right? And when you do bad things, you lose your spells, right? You actually act like a devout, like a cleric. You're like, hey, I have to go feed the poor to get my miracles back, to recharge my magic and stuff. And so, it actually, again, makes you roleplay your character and do what your character would do. Anyway, I really like the classes in the King archetype. They're fantastic, super bloody cool. I enjoy it immensely just thinking about the encouragement of roleplay, encouragement of actually playing an interesting character, an interesting class that's not just like, oh yeah, you use the weave and you have spell slots and you're like every other class and there's really nothing interesting about you, but just kind of pretend that you're interesting. Like, no, 5 years late. 5 years late. This actually gives you some meat. Anyway, that was a long video and I'm fading by the end. Thank you very much for watching. Feed the algorithm, please. We're trying to blow up here on YouTube. Explosion style. So anyway, thanks for watching. God bless.